6 months after stopping all my medications, I was still waking up at 3 o'clock every single night. My blood sugar was perfect, my sleep was not. I'm Neil. I reversed my type 2 diabetes and stopped 6 medications. But nobody told me my sleep would be the last thing to heal. In the next 9 minutes, why metabolic damage breaks sleep patterns decades before diagnosis. The timeline my body actually followed, what finally changed at month 7. Here's what happened in October 2023. So why does this happen? You sort out the blood sugar, you stop the medications, everything's heading in the right direction. And yet you're still lying awake at 3 AM wondering what on earth is going on. Matthew Walker, neuroscientist at Berkeley, probably the world's leading sleep researcher, puts it this way. Sleep isn't the third pillar of health. It's the foundation. Everything else sits on it. Exercise, nutrition, fasting, all of it rests on sleep, which is a problem because what Walker's work also shows is that metabolic damage doesn't just affect your blood sugar, it damages the system that controls when you sleep and how deeply you sleep. And that damage takes time to reverse. Longer, it turns out, than the blood sugar does. Here's the mechanism, and this is where it gets interesting. Your body is a factory with shift workers, each on a precise rota. Your melatonin, the night security guard, is supposed to lock up at around 10 PM, signal to your brain that it's dark, it's quiet, time to wind down. Your growth hormone repair crew clocks in between 11 and 3 AM. That's when the real overnight work happens. Tissue repair, cellular maintenance, the stuff that makes you feel good the next morning. Your liver, waste processing team, turns up at 2 AM and your cortisol, the morning alarm, rings at 6 AM to get you up and ready. Every worker has a schedule, and that schedule is timed to the light-dark cycle, to sunrise and sunset, to eating windows, to consistency. Here's what years of metabolic dysfunction does to that factory. Elevated blood sugar, insulin resistance, chronic inflammation. They don't just sit in one place, they disrupt the whole signalling system. The night security guard starts clocking in late. The repair crew turns up but can't do the work properly because the factory floor is still noisy. Cortisol, which should be low at night, stays elevated. Result, you're lying in bed at 3 AM, cortisol ticking over, brain running, unable to get back to sleep. Not because anything is wrong in that moment, because the rota got scrambled years ago and it hasn't been reset yet. Dr. Sophie Bostock, sleep scientist and one of the leading researchers on behavioural approaches to insomnia, explains what this cortisol disruption actually does. When sleep is poor and cortisol stays elevated, your brain starts interpreting the world as threatening. Your threat perception goes up, your stress response amplifies, adrenaline, cortisol, blood pressure, they're all elevated, all reinforcing each other. It's an evolutionary cascade that's evolved to help you fight or flee. Useful if there's a bear outside the tent, not especially useful at 3 AM when you've had a really fine day and you just want to sleep. That matters for the person who hasn't had a diagnosis yet as much as it does for the person who has. Circadian disruption doesn't start at diagnosis. It develops quietly, often a decade or more before HbA1c flags anything. If you're in your late 30s or 40s, sleeping inconsistently, waking at odd hours, not feeling properly rested, the factory rota may already be slipping. Now here's the deep sleep piece, and this is the part most people miss completely. Deep sleep isn't just good sleep, it's a completely different psychological state. All day, your brain accumulates rubbish. Dead cells, metabolic waste, damaged proteins, and specifically beta amyloid plaques, which are linked to Alzheimer's. During deep sleep, and only during deep sleep, your brain activates what's called the glymphatic system. The council bin lorry drives through, collects the lot, hoses down the street. Walker's team published research on this specifically. The glymphatic cleansing system only fully switches on during deep sleep. If you miss deep sleep, 5-hour nights, broken sleep, alcohol before bed, and the lorry doesn't come, the rubbish piles up, not for a night, for weeks, months. Which is why the question isn't just, did you sleep long enough? It's did you get enough deep sleep? Two completely different questions. And here's what metabolic dysfunction specifically does to deep sleep. Elevated blood sugar disrupts slow wave brain activity. Inflammation interferes with the lymphatic process. Poor insulin sensitivity affects melatonin timing. All of this means that even if you were putting in 8 hours, the quality, the deep sleep percentage, was likely compromised for years before any blood test flagged a problem. Which finally explains why fixing the blood sugar doesn't immediately fix the sleep. The blood sugar is a relatively quick win, months, not years. The circadian factory rota, the cortisol rhythm, the deep sleep architecture, those are slower. The system has to relearn its schedule, and that takes time it is going to take regardless. One misconception worth clearing up now. People assume fixing the diet means sleep follows automatically. I assume the same. HbA1c sorted. Medication stopped. I thought sleep would be next. It wasn't, not for 6 months. It's not a failure, it's just biology running on different timelines for different systems. So that's the science. Here's what it actually looked like from where I was standing. October 2023, Boxing Day hasn't arrived yet. I hadn't started the reset, but looking back at the data, sleep was already a mess. 4-5 hours, waking around 3 a.m. most nights. Not dramatically broken, not the kind of thing you'd take to a GP, just not right. Lying there, cortisol presumably doing whatever elevated cortisol does at 3 a.m. Brain starting to tick. Nothing particular to think about, just awake. I've been on cetirizine daily, antihistamine for decades. What I didn't fully clock at the time was that antihistamines have a sedating effect. So part of what I've been experiencing as going to sleep wasn't sleep architecture working properly. It was sedation. When I stopped the cetirizine, the actual picture became visible. Turns out it hadn't been working properly for a long time. I started the reset Boxing Day 2023. Fasting was established by February. Non-UPF eating was locked in by March. HbA1c started moving, measurements changing. Blood work was improving. By April, the direction was clear. Sleep, still broken. Still the 3 a.m. wake. Still that cortisol alarm clock going off at the wrong hour. Like a factory security guard who'd been clocking in at midnight for years and hadn't been told the rota's changed. Honestly, the most frustrating part of the whole process, everything else was responding. I felt better during the day, but I'd wake at 3 o'clock and lie there. Sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes an hour or two. Just waiting it out. Well, the data showed during that period was exactly what Sophie Bostock describes. 4 consecutive nights under 5 hours. I logged this during a heavy work week in spring 2024, and the downstream effects were precisely and entirely predictable. Cortisol elevated, decision making tanked. It ended up eating around 2,000 calories of sugary food in a single afternoon. Not because I was hungry in any meaningful sense, because the brain, running on elevated cortisol and disrupted gremlin, bypassed conscious decision making entirely and went straight for quick fuel. Interesting thing about that data point, the weight held steady. The metabolic flexibility I'd been building for 10 weeks absorbed the wobble, but the sleep deprivation didn't negotiate. It didn't ask permission. It just did what disrupted cortisol and ghrelin do. The shift came, and I'm being specific because the timeline matters, around month 5, May 2024. 3 months off antihistamines. Circadian discipline had been building steadily. Consistent, midnight to bed, room was at a reasonable temperature, hadn't been doing screens for the last 30 minutes before bed. Eating window had been closing early, 6-7 o'clock in the evening. 18-6, 17-7 fasting was pretty much my average. And one morning in May I woke up at 5:47, no alarms, room pitch black, no grogginess, no reaching for the phone to calculate how many minutes I could still squeeze. I was just clear, ready, awake. What I understand now is that this wasn't sleep getting better in any simple sense. The factory rota had either finally reset or was resetting. Cortisol was doing what cortisol was supposed to do. low at night, rising naturally towards 6 a.m. Melatonin timing was getting corrected. The repair crew had been doing their work. I just couldn't see it from inside the process. The year-end data backs it up. Track sleep quality across all of 2025. 57 nights rated 9 or 10 out of 10. No sleeping pills, no melatonin supplements, no alcohol to relax, just metabolic health, circadian discipline, and enough time for the system to rebuild itself. The sleep didn't fix because I got healthy, it fixed because the underlying system, the factory, the rota, the circadian clock, had enough time and enough correct signals to rebuild. And that took the time it was always going to take. 13 years of NHS blood tests, the actual numbers, the GP conversations, what changed and what didn't. If you want to follow someone who documents this properly rather than just talks about it, that's what this channel is. Subscribe if that's going to be useful to you. If any of this is landing, waking at odd hours, never quite rested, sleeping enough on paper but not feeling it, here's where to start. One thing, morning light. Not a supplement, not a device. Just go outside, 10 to 15 minutes, within an hour of waking, without sunglasses. Professor Dubruskine at Surrey, one of the world's leading circadian biologists, measured outdoor daylight against indoor artificial light. Even on a grey British winter morning, outdoor light is 100 to 500 times brighter than the strongest artificial light indoors. Your master body clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain, is calibrated to that signal. It needs the short wavelength light hitting the retina to know what time it is and set the day's rota accordingly. Without that morning signal, the factory workers drift. They start arriving at the wrong times. The rota slips a little every day. And the downstream effects, melatonin timing, cortisol rhythm, deep sleep quality, all shift with it. Think of it like an analog watch that loses 2 or 3 minutes a day. Left unchecked, it's 20 minutes slow within a week. Morning light is resetting it against the correct signal every morning. Simple, free, 10 minutes. Practically, alarm goes, put something on, step outside, 10 minutes minimum. No sunglasses, they filter the specific wavelength the clock needs. Overcast is fine. To February in Yorkshire is fine. Outside is what matters, not sunshine. Track it simply, notepad by the bed. Write down the time you wake naturally if you do, and your morning energy out of 10. After 2 weeks, you'll have a pattern. Most people notice the first shift, waking more naturally. Morning grogginess is easing within 10 to 14 days. Start here before changing anything else. The factory rota resets from the morning signal first. Everything downstream follows that anchor. Timeline, be honest with yourself. My 3 a.m. wake pattern took 6 months to fully resolve. Morning light isn't a quick fix. It's the correct lever applied consistently over enough time for the biology to respond. Weeks for early signs, months for the full reset. That's the timeline. I've built a sleep and circadian reset tracker. It logs morning light practice, wake time, sleep quality, and gives you a weekly trend. The link is in the description and it's free. Now the disclaimer, and I mean this every time, everything here is educational content. It's not medical advice. If you're on medication, blood pressure, blood sugars, anything affecting your nervous system, please speak to your GP before changing your sleep schedule or fasting pattern. Circadian interventions are generally low risk, but your specific history does matter. The timeline I've described is mine, n equals 1. Your biology runs on its own schedule.